Suddenly, someone disappears. No fight, no explanation, no big scene. Messages stop being answered. The name vanishes from notifications. Calls are ignored. Sometimes it's someone close. Sometimes it's you. And what stays is the same heavy silence, full of questions. What happened? Did I do something wrong? Why did they disappear like that? From the outside, this looks like coldness. But most of the time, it's not about indifference. It's about exhaustion. Disappearing out of nowhere is often the desperate way some people find to survive when everything feels too heavy. It's not a strategic plan. It's an emotional shutdown. The pressure of always having to respond, be available, explain feelings, maintain conversations, and meet expectations becomes too much. When that happens, the instinct for self-preservation speaks louder. The mind presses a kind of off button, and the person retreats without a return date. Psychology sees this as a stress escape mechanism and a form of emotional avoidance. The brain starts to treat contact itself as a threat. Each message becomes a demand. Each notification, a reminder that you owe someone an answer. For those already overloaded, the idea of sustaining one more conversation is simply unbearable. Walking away seems easier than saying, "I don't have the energy for this now." For those who live this pattern, disappearing brings immediate relief. The phone quiets down. Requests stop. The world feels less invasive. But soon, another feeling arrives. Guilt. The person begins to worry about the impression they left, imagines the other feeling abandoned, and quietly accuses themselves of being selfish. It's a paradox. They disappear to find peace, and then suffer for having disappeared. If you have ever vanished without warning, or lived with someone who does this video is for you. We're going to look at what really happens inside the mind of someone who walks away in silence. The tiredness, the fear, the history that this behavior tries to hide. Because, many times, disappearing is less about the other person and more about a desperate attempt to stay whole. Tell me below, have you ever disappeared like this? Or has someone ever disappeared from you? I want to know how much this touches your story. And if you want to keep understanding the psychology behind behaviors that almost no one explains, subscribe to the channel. Disappearing out of nowhere is common in people who live for a long time in a state of emotional overload. It's not planned distancing, it's collapse. When the mind feels that it has already tried to explain itself, be understanding, be present for everyone, a moment comes when it simply shuts down. It's as if it said, "I no longer know how to cope, so I need to disappear for a while." Psychologists describe this as an unconscious escape from stress. The person moves away from everything that feels like a threat, including affection. For someone always on alert, every interaction can feel like pressure. What am I going to say? How should I respond? Will I sound strange? Walking away in this context isn't a sign that the person doesn't care. It's the only way they've found to stop feeling in debt to everyone all the time. Many people who disappear learned very early to deal with the world in silence. They grew up in homes where it was safer to withdraw than to be seen. Sometimes the adults always argued, and hiding was the only way to avoid being dragged into the conflict. Sometimes, when they expressed sadness or anger, they were called dramatic, ungrateful, or too much. The child learned that existing only in the background was safer. As adults, this pattern returns in a more discreet form. When life fills up with obligations, expectations, and emotional demands, the body reacts like it did back then, by shutting down. The person stops answering messages, avoids calls, declines invitations without saying why. It's a cry for help translated as absence. Outside, it looks like coldness. Inside, it's fear and tiredness. There is usually also a deep belief behind this. I'm a burden when I'm present. Many people disappear because they're convinced they will only weigh others down if they show how they really feel. So they prefer to retreat. They imagine that if they stay away, at least they won't ruin anyone's day with their sadness or confusion. But what happens is the opposite. The silence hurts both those who stay and those who leave. At first, isolation brings peace. Notifications stop, no one expects an answer, and finally there is no need to perform being okay. But soon, the same silence becomes heavy. Messages pile up, people stop insisting, the world continues, and the person begins to feel precisely what they feared most. That they won't be missed. Psychology calls this a self-fulfilling prophecy. The fear of rejection ends up creating the rejection. Those who disappear to avoid being a burden end up feeling disposable. And the cycle repeats. Every time life weighs, the mind remembers that disappearing worked once and chooses the same path again. Over time, this habit leaves invisible marks. Relationships become superficial because every time someone tries to get closer, the reflex is to pull away. The person feels inadequate for affection, invaded by any demand, guilty for not being present. They begin to believe that it's better to be alone, not because they prefer solitude, but because they're tired of feeling that they disappoint others. Inside, another process unfolds. Identity starts to blur. When you disappear too much, you disappear from yourself too. You stop recognizing what you like, what you want, what you feel. Life becomes a constant move between overload and escape. Isolation, which at first was rest, turns into anesthesia, a way of not feeling anything. But disappearing is also a misdirected cry for help. It's the language of someone who doesn't know how to ask for rest without feeling weak, of someone who doesn't know how to say, "I'm not well," without believing they're a burden. Behind each silence, there is usually a very simple desire to be understood without having to explain everything. The change begins when the person realizes they don't need to disappear to rest. It is possible to withdraw without cutting ties. The first step is to rename what happens. Instead of telling yourself, "I disappear from everyone," you can recognize, "I disconnect when I'm overwhelmed." This small change transforms guilt into awareness. The second step is to learn to communicate silence. A simple, "I need some time but I'm okay," avoids misunderstandings and breaks the cycle of guilt. It doesn't need a long text or detailed reasons. Sometimes, a short message is enough to preserve the bond while you take care of yourself. Psychology calls this conscious withdrawal. When the pause stops being escape and becomes care, the third step is to return gradually. You don't need to come back with energy you don't have. Start with a short reply, a simple good morning, a reaction to a message. The goal isn't to compensate for your absence, but to remind your mind that you can be present without needing to be perfect. It's also essential to redefine what rest means. True rest doesn't always mean closing the door on the world. It means finding spaces where you can exist without performing. It can be an afternoon off the phone, a quiet walk, or a moment alone. The difference is that instead of disappearing without a trace, you begin to create pauses with awareness. Psychologists call this active self-compassion, recognizing your limits without turning them into punishment. Understanding that needing space doesn't make you cold. It makes you human. Little by little, you realize you can exist between being and disappearing. That you can take care of yourself without cutting every bridge. In the end, no one really wants to disappear. People just want a place where they can be quiet without being charged, where silence isn't interpreted as abandonment. They want to exist without having to be strong all the time. Disappearing out of nowhere isn't always giving up. Sometimes it's the only way someone finds to protect themselves when they no longer see any other option. But as awareness grows, silence can stop being escape and become a deliberate, kind pause. One in which you don't run away from everyone, just get closer to yourself. If this spoke to you, share it with someone who has already walked away in silence. Maybe this is the gentlest way to say, I understand. And if you want to keep understanding the psychology behind behaviors that almost no one explains, subscribe to the channel, because deep down, disappearing out of nowhere is often the beginning of the way back to yourself.